A former detective, wrongfully sentenced to death, stands silently in court. Everyone believes he's guilty. Everyone, except his dog. Just when all hope seems lost, Rustam, his loyal German shepherd, finds something in the woods that changes everything: a camera with the real killers on tape. What happens next is a battle for truth, justice, and redemption. This is not fiction. This is the story of how a dog defied the system and saved a man's life. If you think you've heard it all, think again. Watch until the end. You won't believe what this dog uncovered. Imagine standing in a cold courtroom, facing a death sentence for a crime you didn't commit. No one believes you. Not the jury. Not the prosecutor. Not even the grieving mother of the woman you loved. That was Alexei Morozov's reality. A decorated former detective, now labeled a murderer. The evidence? Overwhelming. The case? Closed. And his only request before execution? To see his dog Rustam. What happened next stunned everyone. When Rustam sees his owner, he reacts strangely alert, tense, as if he senses something. Moments later, he bolts into the forest and disappears. Hours turn into days. And then, the unexpected happens. Rustam returns, not to the prison, but to a stranger carrying a small plastic box, a lost camera containing video proof that the real killers were still free. What follows is a breathtaking unraveling of truth. An overturned sentence. A reopened case. And a man, once condemned, slowly reclaiming his life. This is not a story about crime. This is a story about loyalty, instinct, and justice. About a dog who refused to let his human die for something he didn't do. And a system forced to admit they got it wrong. The judge sentenced the man to death. Until a dog came into the courtroom with evidence. That changed everything. He knew that no one believed him, not the prosecutor, not the juror, not even the one who had been sitting with him in the same cell. The last weeks he knew and still hoped for what? For a miracle, for the truth. No, he hoped only for one thing, that Rustam would understand Alexei Morozov, stand up. The courtroom froze, the dull hum of air conditioners. The coughing of an old reporter in the gallery, and blinkers, pens in the protocol. All this is much louder than the words of the judge. Alexei rose slowly, as if he knew that this was the last time he would be asked to stand up, not to be taken away forever. The court found you guilty of the rape and murder of Sophia Rendell. The verdict: death penalty. Not a single exclamation or groan was heard in the courtroom. Only someone clicked a pen. Everything was decided in advance. He did not flinch. His gaze only slid to the side. Somewhere in the corridor, behind a concrete wall, an old German shepherd named Rustam was waiting for him. He sat in a carrier, calm as always, as if he understood everything at first sight. He loved Sophia. She was perhaps the only woman who knew how to make him keep quiet and not get angry. They met after he was fired from the police, and in a couple of months she had managed to enter his life as if she had always lived there. And then she was found dead. The apartment was covered in blood. The door had not been broken down. Traces of a struggle, fingerprints on the neck of the bottle of his boot, and bloodstains, DNA on her body. Everything matched. He said, "I was set up. They didn't care." "Do you have a final word?" the judge asked. Alexei did not answer right away. He looked at the prosecutor, at the jury, at the empty bench where Sophia's mother had previously sat. "Yes," he said finally. "When this is all over, I want to be allowed to see my dog Rustam." The judge frowned. "This is your last desire?" "Yes." The judge nodded, not understanding. Why would a person doomed to death see a dog? The protocol recorded. Last wish, meeting with a dog. Rustam. Alexei was let out of the courtroom. He walked calmly, as he once walked to the interrogation room. As he walked to the manhunt. Only then, on his belt, was a Cabra radio ID. Now only handcuffs and numbers on the back of his overalls. Behind the glass he saw her mother. She looked straight at the sky, tired, without tears but with hatred he did not lower. His gaze because he himself had already ceased to understand why he was still looking at this world when he was locked up in solitary confinement. He, for the first time, allowed himself to lie down, not on a bunk but straight on the concrete floor. No pain, just silence and cold. Sometimes the prison doctor came with pills and the chaplain offered confession. Alexei was silent. There was no one to talk to. 3 days passed. On the fourth to him a guard came in with a glow face. Your dog is here. Alexei sat down. Where? Over in the backyard. They brought Dolly. 20 minutes he stood up and walked without words, without resistance. He was led into a fenced area where they usually walk service dogs. Rustam was sitting there by the net. The dog did not move from his place until Alexei came closer. Then he stood up and, as if those 2 weeks of separation had not happened, slowly approached and put his muzzle on his lap. Alexei sat down next to him, put his hands on his warm forehead. He felt the same fur that he scratched in the evenings in front of the TV, when there was still a man with a future. Sorry, he said quietly. Did not protect her, could not. Rustam quietly barked. It was the sound that he usually made when he felt anxiety. Alexei understood. The dog knew and felt something. They were wrong. Rustam, I did not kill her. The dog raised its head, ears stood up, eyes tensed, and a second later Rustam jumped up, turned to the fence and froze. Something caught his attention behind the net there, far away in the bushes. A person or an animal flashed shadow. Rustam growled, "Hey!" Alexei shouted, but the guard was already walking towards him. All the time has come and wait all. Morozov, let's go. Rustam did not move. He stood by the fence and looked towards the forest. Then he suddenly jumped up and disappeared into the shadows. He crawled under the net as if he knew he had to go. The guard swore. Damn, he ran away. Alexei smiled for the first time in many weeks. Let him go. That same evening, a short story was shown on the news. Former detective Alexei Morozov, accused of murdering a girl, was sentenced to death. The trial was declared closed. The sentence will be carried out within a month. The TV was turned off. Alexei again remained in silence, but somewhere there, behind the walls, in the deep forest, a dog was running, to whom Bella did not care about the essence, politics and headlines. He knew only one thing: his master was innocent, and he would prove it. The prison regime did not suffered changes. Every day was similar to the previous one, like 2 drops of muddy water. Only one thing stood out from this viscous routines: Rustam's disappearance. The guards, having laughed at the great errant, decided that the dog would either die in the forest or be shot by hunters. Alexei did not try to convince them. He simply remained silent. Now he had something that they could not take away, a feeling that somewhere out there, in freedom, some other game for the sky had begun. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, a man from the Internal Investigation Service, Lieutenant Colonel Green, knocked on the door of the prison chief's office. He was the type who never shakes hands so as not to leave traces. As they said in the administration, "You have a strange episode here," he said. "Do you have any recordings from the cameras of this dog as he leaves?" "Yes. The cameras in the backyard captured everything. I need to look at them." The chief shrugged. Half an hour later they were sitting in the observation room. On the screen, a black and white image. Alexei is sitting next to Rustam. Then the dog suddenly jumps up and disappears. A second later something flickers in the far corner of the screen. A man is a shadow of the unwinding, but someone was there. Green rewound. "You see?" The chief frowned. "Yes, it is not a prisoner and not our man, it seems." Green tapped his finger on the monitor. "You understand that if Morozov is still innocent, it could cost us our heads. The evidence was iron, I know, but still." Meanwhile in the forest, Rustam moved by instincts. He followed the scent of the subtle marks that were preserved in his memory. He had been in this forest before. Sophia, Alexei, and he were walking Here 3 months ago, hot August. Day, then everything was still white, just laughter. Thermos with coffee, deer flickering between trees. He found an old campsite. Trampled earth, burnt stones, the remains of a tent, the smell of herring and blood. He buried his nose in the ground, dug with his paws. After a few minutes, a click, something hard. A piece of plastic, a box. He grabbed it and carried where he himself did not know. He simply ran through the forest, through the swamp, along the road, until he came to a country road. Jack Pearson, the hunter, was driving home on his rusty pickup truck when a dog jumped out in front of him. The brakes squealed. Jack jumped out with a shotgun, but the dog didn't attack. He walked up and put a strange plastic box right at the feet of the man. Damn, who are you? On the plastic was the logo of the camera memory card. Jack took it, put it in his pocket, and put the dog in the back. Okay, tramp, let's see what you have here. A few hours later, he inserted the card into the laptop. The screen flickered. The folder was called Night 1208. The first file is a dark, shaking image. Someone apparently didn't notice that the camera was still recording then. Noise, footsteps, voice faster. You idiot, you left the gloves. Yes, run, she's unconscious. The camera tilts, silhouettes of faces. Biker vests. One has a tattoo of a skull with rabbits. Jack squinted. He knew this tattoo. It wasn't an accident. He knew who was it. The next morning he came to the station and asked to talk to the detective. The map was in the hands of the police. Meanwhile, in the prison cell, Alexei heard the click of the lock. Not on schedule. He was led into the interrogation room. A man with a laptop and a folder was sitting at the table. Lieutenant Colonel Green. Alexei, we have new material. Video. He pressed play. Alexei froze. He knew this man with the tattoo. The name came up itself. Blake Harris. One of those he once tried to steal. One of those who swore that everything would still be. Alexei raised his gaze to Green. This video will give me a chance. Green nodded silently. If DNA confirms and the court accepts the evidence, you will leave here. Alexei inhaled quietly without joy. He knew the case had just begun. Lieutenant Colonel Green looked at Alexei with an expression in which irritation, doubt, and first everything indicated that Alexei was telling the truth, but there was one but. This was not enough. We checked, the bikers said. Green, their last address was an abandoned farm in the north of the district. They left 2 weeks ago, but if it is confirmed that on the video he fell silent, it will be loud. Sophia was killed because of me, Alexei said dully. I locked up the brother of one of them 6 years ago for drugs, weapons. He got 20-inch. Green nodded. You had a motive, but now we have new evidence. Meanwhile, Rustam was in the Opni shelter, a city shelter on the outskirts of Jack Pearson. The hunter handed him over there, deciding that he had done everything he could, but the dog did not want to stay. He whined, growled, and once almost broke the metal door of the enclosure. The employees laughed. It was as if he knew that somewhere there he had not finished the case. They did not understand how close it was to the truth. A request came in from the forensic database. Compared DNA with Sophia Rendell's clothes with the profile of Blake Harris and Charlie Gruber. The answer came in 2 days later. Match 99.8%. 2 samples identified. Alexei Morozov excluded. A week later, under cover of night, accompanied by armed guards, Alexei sat in a black van. They were taking him to the federal building. He was still listed as a prisoner, but this was already temporary. In the prosecutor's office, he saw everything. Same footage from the camera, shadows, voices crept via laughter. Everything that he had been holding back burst out, but not with tears. No cold anger. Did you arrest them? He asked. One, answered prosecutor. Blake Harris found in a house on the state line, second on the run, but with DNA we will pull him out from under the ground. What about the verdict today? The Supreme Court is reviewing the decision. You will return to prison, but already in the status of temporarily released under protection. You will be acquitted. Alexei nodded slowly. I want Rustam to be returned to me. Rustam was sitting by the window in the enclosure and did not take his eyes off the road. When the gates opened and Alexei entered the building, the dog did not scream or howl. He just stood up like a soldier who saw the commander. Alexei approached and dropped to his knees. The dog poked his chest, and for the first time in all the time, Alexei allowed himself to close his eyes for at least a minute and not feel anything except the fur under his fingers and the warm breath of a friend. But justice is a slow and evil thing. The bikers hired lawyers declared forgery evidence. Pressure. One of the jurors allegedly had a biased opinion. A scandal has begun. The media exploded. Alexei's name appeared in the headlines again, not as the name of a killer, but as the name of a man whose life was almost broken. A detective accused of murder is acquitted after evidence found by his dog. The headline sounded like a movie script, but for Alexei it was not a movie. It was a life that was taken from him and which now must be Bella returned piece by piece. The last trial lasted 6 hours. The judge reread the materials. The prosecutor filed a petition to overturn the verdict. In the finale, everything was said in one phrase: Alexei Morozov is completely acquitted and released. He went out into the street, where Rustam stood at the steps of the building without a leash, without a collar. He just stood. They silently walked away. Freedom, a thing strange when you have it. You don't notice it. When they take it away, you feel differently. Alexei felt it on the first day after his release, when he woke up in a cheap motel room, to the rustle of the air conditioner and not to the cries of the guard. He lay on the bed in the clothes that were given to him far away when he left, and listened to Rustam quietly snoring next to him on the floor. He didn't know where to go. Neva had no friends left. The family had left for different states, and those who were nearby turned away. The phone given to him by the police department vibrated. SMS from Green. Harris turned in. The second. Charlie Gruber tomorrow. Extradition. Do you want to be present? Alexei didn't answer. He didn't want to be present. He wanted all this to end. The next day he still went to the courthouse, not to participate but to watch. A van with the prisoner drove up. Under guard, a man came out with long dirty hair and a crumpled jacket. Charlie Gruber, the same one who was laughing in the video, holding Sophia by her hair. Alexei was standing around the corner. No one noticed him except Charlie. He turned his head and covered their gazes. Met for a couple of seconds, and in these seconds Alexei saw real fear. The same one that is not given out in court. He knew the man who killed would now live in fear as he himself lived. 2 weeks later, the trial began against Harris and Gruber. The prosecutor called witnesses, DNA experts, video editing specialists. The defense tried to challenge the memory card, claiming that it could have been planted, but the main thing is different. On one of the tapes found on Harris, investigators found a piece of video where he bragged, "Yes, we just buried this trash. Who would listen to him after this?" And then another phrase, "And this woman herself guilty. Who did you get involved with?" That was enough. The court sentenced Blake Harris and Charlie Gruber to life imprisonment without the right to parole. At the end of the trial, the prosecutor, collecting the folders, looked at Alexei. "Do you want to file a civil lawsuit?" Compensation pledged. Charges years of life, reputation there. Millions. Alexei shook his head no. Why did he look at Rustam, who was sitting in the hallway and gnawing on an old ball? "I don't need money, I need all of this to be left behind." Later he was put on a talk show interview for a major TV channel. He refused. EGA was invited to speak at a conference on the reform of the criminal proceedings. He refused. He was offered to write a book. He refused. He simply got into an old car, bought with the remaining money, threw a bowl, a blanket, a backpack into the trunk and said to Rustam, "Let's go." The house he moved into was old, creaky and smelled of what all houses that have been empty for a long time smell of: sin, old wood, and neglect life. But he was clean. The owner, a local carpenter, before leaving, fixed the car, left some firewood and said goodbye. Here the silence is not just in the background. Here the silence is like a person with whom you will have to live. Alexei only nodded. He had long been accustomed to living with someone who says nothing. He bought this house for the amount that the state paid him as compensation. He accepted the money reluctantly, as if with dirty hands, but he chose the house right away, outskirts of the state of Forest Lakes. 40 minutes by car to the nearest city. 10 minutes on foot to the nearest neighbor. An ideal place not to hear other people's voices at first. Life flowed strangely. Every sound seemed suspicious. Every glance in the supermarket was aimed. Alexei caught himself locking the doors even during the day and checking the windows before going to bed. But Rustam adapted faster. As if he immediately understood, there is no more danger. Now it's just living every morning. Began the same way. First silence. Then Rustam's steps on the floor. Then he got up, opened the door, went out onto the porch, inhaled the cold morning air, and watched the steam rise from the cup of coffee. Rustam lay down at his feet, putting his muzzle on his paws and calmly waited. Sometimes he went out into the forest, not for hunting or for prey. He just walked, an axe on his shoulder, a thermos in his backpack. He left for the whole day, and only in the evening returned with brushwood, mushrooms, sometimes with robot. He worked with his hands. This was the only thing that gave him a feeling that he was alive. The neighbors, or rather the few who lived nearby, did not pry into his soul. One local mechanic named Wald offered him a part-time job, repairing fences, sawing wood. Alexei did not refuse. He did not look for friends, but he did not have any enemies here either. Where are you from? Wald once asked. From far away? Alexei answered. This turned out to be enough. Once a month he went to town to buy food, fishing tackle, books. Sometimes he took old issues of newspapers, as if he was looking for a mention of himself there, but no one had written about him for a long time. The world forgotten, and that was good. Rustam sat next to him in the car, looked out the window, quietly snorted when bikers drove past. He still remembered the smell. Alexei felt it, but now none of them caused anxiety. Those who should have pain sat down. The rest disappeared. One day Green came to him without a uniform, without a car, with special signals, in an old pickup with a bag in his hands. He came out, said hello, sat down on the porch and silently opened a beer. Here you are, he said. Where else would I be? Green nodded. I didn't restore my license. I don't want to. I'm not in the system anymore. You were a good cop. It doesn't matter anymore. They were silent for about 10 minutes. Then Green put his bag on the floor. Here are the documents if you ever want to be reinstated. And he also took out a small medallion from his inside pocket, a service badge on the back stamped Morozov 21st District to the end. It's not official, but you earned it. Alexei took it and looked at it and squeezed it in his palm. Thank you. I'll go. Good luck. They didn't see each other again. The years went by. Rustam was getting old. His muzzle became gray, his paws were slower. He still went out with Alexei for walks, but he no longer ran after birds. More often he lay under a tree and watched the owner cat firewood or fix the hook. He lived another 4 years, and one day he simply didn't wake up. Alexei buried him near the house under a large oak tree, put up a wooden cross, didn't write anything, just sat next to him and sat to the sunset watching the sunbeams pass through the foliage. He did not cry, did not speak. Just quietly inhaled thank you. Now he lived alone. Sometimes children of neighbors came to him to help bring food. He did not become the one everyone fears, but not the one to whom they run for advice. Just a man who lives quietly and honestly after surviving death, betrayal, prison and driving. One evening when he was reading an old book and drinking tea, a branch knocked on the window. The wind grew stronger. Alexei went out onto the porch, adjusted the shutter, inhaled the air and looked at the sky and thought that now everything is in its place. He knew that he would not return to the past. He did not hold a grudge, he did not want revenge. All this was gone, only peace and memory remained about her, about him, about the dog that once saved his life. He sank down on the steps of the porch, turned his face to the wind and closed his eyes. Silence, the very one about which the carpenter had spoken, that with which could now be lived. If you believe dogs are more than pets, they're heroes, hit the like button. Share this story to honor the loyalty that saved a life. Subscribe now for more emotional true stories that prove, sometimes, the heart knows what the law does not.